Proudly supported by Superior Engineering and Diesel Conversions Australia.
Wiring is one of those things that most people freak out about when doing an engine conversion. And I'm actually one of those people. When you see a whole heap of wires taped up like this, it kind of gets a little bit spooky and you're kind of thinking like, what the hell am I doing? Chopping up wires and making looms work with other looms. Now what we're going to do in today's episode is we're going to put the wiring harness back on this engine. I'm going to explain a little bit as to how I understand how this is going to work. We also have a harness sent over from Diesel Conversions Australia. We also have some instructions just to help us along this process. So what I've done is I've laid everything out on the ground and I've basically gone through and labeled every single sensor that we're going to need. Up in the patrol engine bay, you can see this is the main fuse block that I'm talking about. Now these plugs down here are the ones that control the start relay, the alternator, the glow plug relay, and a few other little bits and pieces. And right up on that firewall is where I've cut the old engine harness that comes out of the firewall, and you can see I'm only left with my RPM and my water sensor. Now I know this looks really daunting down here, but it's quite simple. We have our fuse box wiring harness. This is also fuse box, so these two basically need to get all those sensors down there and wires hooked up to the old fuse box wiring off the 4J. Now this piece of spaghetti here is the 4J wiring harness. Now this is the plug that will plug into the ECU. Now I only took this harness off just so I could paint the engine, but we've got all our sensors labeled, and then down the back here, this is actually the wiring harness that would have gone into the 4J fuse box. So all we need to do is hook up that to our fuse box wiring, and then a few other wires like the alternator start wire and also the starter motor wire that needs to be nice and thick. And that brings us to the Diesel Conversion Australia adapter harness. Now this thing makes it all possible. It takes the stress out of it. Now we've got the plug that goes into the other side of the ECU. There is two plugs on the ECU. All these wires are labeled, and from what I can read, a lot of them go into our throttle pedal. If you don't know, you do need this throttle pedal, and DCA also do a bracket to make that mount into the patrol, which I'll show you guys later. Now this also gives the ECU its power and ignition source. So this thing is definitely a necessity when you're doing this stuff. Now the other thing is we get a full list of instructions. So this actually just narrows it down and saves a lot of time with the instructions. You can see they've even got pictures, which is great. So this is going to be awesome. I've actually already gone ahead and read it, and I've just about labeled everything. This one here is glow plugs. I've just gone ahead and put some tape and a label on every wire so I know how to connect it into the patrol. Now, I don't know how confusing that was for you, but that's how I've sort of broken it down in my head. Now, I do have to give a huge shout out to a bloke named Troy who's been helping me out massively. He's done the hard yards. I've basically done bugger all at this point. I've just followed his instructions. But as I was doing it, I started to sort of understand that we are working with the 4 different harnesses and we just need to make them all work together. So now not only are we doing that, we are going to be wiring up the all good off-road stuff. What I want to do with that is have some ignition power in here as well as a constant power. We're going to be taking some relays and stuff off of that. Over on the bench here, we also have some other stuff. Now I've got a Davies Craig fan switch, which has 2 relays in it. I'll show you guys that a little bit later, but that's going to control our thermo fans. I am also going to be ordering some different thermo fans, so don't you guys worry. Those eBay ones are going in the bin. Now in the last episode, you would have seen that I had a little green fuel pump. I have since returned that, and I went to Burson's and got this Raceworks black pump. So it's 14 PSI and I think about 500 litres an hour. That is the one that DCA recommended. So I returned mine, got that one, and we know that that is going to work. Also a few other little bits and pieces that we're going to be doing, and I'll explain that sort of stuff as I go. And I apologise for the waffling if you want to just see me crack on with the work. I'm about to start now. Now what I've basically done is I zip tied up the first part of the harness just so I know how long my wires need to be. And then I basically stretch them all out to the same length, and I've just been cutting and joining the wires as I go. Ignore that one at the moment. But you can see they've all been connected down here. Now, most of them were super easy because when I pulled the ZD30 out, what I did is just went ahead and labeled everything. So I basically had like oil sensor labeled, water sensor labeled. DCA instructions actually show you which wire needs to be connected to, let's say, your oil pressure sensor, and then you just basically hook it up to the one that you have marked as oil pressure sensor. So super easy. The only two that were a little bit of a question mark were the alternator sense wires, but the one with the green stripe went to the one with the green stripe, and the white one went to the yellow one, I think, but just double check that if you're following along. Now, obviously everything will get put in conduit and then taped up, but I'm just gonna leave it until we get the thing running just in case we need to add more wires or change something. But it's all looking pretty good so far. Now, the only wire I did modify was the alternator power wire. So it is actually just hooked up here, and then to the top stud here, I used the Patrol one and just cut it down. Now, you don't really have to do that. You could just hook it up to the wire that's coming out here, but then you'd have to run another wire over and connect it to the two white wires. But I just figured the alternator's here, the stud's over there, why not just hook it up and have a short little lead. Now, moving on to the last part of wiring up the 4J, we have Diesel Conversions Australia's adapter harness. Now, we also had to buy a throttle pedal and make sure that if you're doing that, you have a plug on the end, because mine didn't come with a plug. And then we also have DCA's throttle pedal adapter. Right, so what I've done with this harness is I've just pushed it through the firewall up there where the factory ZD harness goes through. And in order to do that, I actually had to cut this boot. So the good thing about that is when I'm done, I'll just whack this boot back round and pop it back in, and it should be good enough to seal because it'll kind of hold itself in that groove. Now, I've already taken the accelerator off as well. This is the Patrol accelerator there, and I've got the accelerator mounted on the DCA bracket there. I just got to tighten up the bolts, but you can see that is just going to screw straight onto the wall, which is nice. Now, one thing that I haven't done, and I should have, is you could have actually had this pre-wired before you pushed it through the wall. I mean, I could still do it, but I'm just going to get in the car and quickly join them up. Now, the instructions are pretty clear, so I'm just going to go through and follow this, wire this plug up, then we'll have some 4J throttle action. All right, so the pedal is now installed in the cab. It's really hard to get in there and show you guys, but it's all bolted up nicely to the DCA throttle pedal bracket. Now, I have also this morning wired up our Savage water temp gauge. I just wired that into the loom that we are creating. I just thought that was the easiest option at the time. So the only wire that's not hooked up is the ignition wire. Now, I have a really cool idea for ignition. Now, up here on the wiper motor, there is actually an ignition wire, and it does stay ignition 12 volt when cranking, which is exactly what we need. Now, I want to kind of do things a little bit different. We could just hook up the harness straight to that wire and be done with it. But what I want to do is I want to put in a giant relay. So this is actually a 100 amp relay. And what I want to do is switch this and liven up half of the board on this fuse block here. So this is from All Good Off-Road. It mounts into our stainless steel cover over there, and it'll be really cool to have half ignition and half battery power just coming out of this unit. So in order to do that, we'll be wiring up this giant relay to these wires that come from All Good Off-Road. We'll then wire them up to that fuse block, and then we can actually start taking our power out of that. What you guys probably just seen was me wiring up this relay. So that is all finished up. Now, I have put it on a 50 amp breaker. So that's this thing here. And the breaker is on the battery cable side. So if we get a fault there, it's just gonna trip that auto reset breaker and cut that out. So the really good thing is now that we turn the key and we get half this board live with ignition power. Now, we need to take ignition power over to the motor loom, right over to this wire here, and then that is actually going to be this side of the wiring complete. Now, we also need to take ignition power for this Raceworks fuel pump, but we also need to wire up our fans. So we've got this Davies Craig relay control box, and it's all adjustable with cut in and cut out temps. So we'll wire that up onto the ignition power as well. Then we've basically just got to hook up all the sensors to make that work. Now, during the filming of last weekend, I was doing a whole heap of Googling and researching and trying to figure out how to get the tacho signal out of this cam sensor. Now, it turns out that my Patrol, being CRD and TI, has a CAN bus system. CAN bus is like signal wires that are talking to the ECU, telling the tacho to work. It's not just the case of like joining two wires together, basically. So that led me down the path to talk to CAN Barra about one of these modules. Now, what this does is it transmits signals and gets everything to work how it should work. So without this, my dash wouldn't actually work. I don't think I would have water temp, and I don't think I would have tacho. The other good thing about this is we are going to be putting in a output for the transmission. So my transmission computer will need an RPM signal to know when to shift. So this thing can do that as well. So we just need to wire this in up under the dash, and then we'll have a working tacho. So there is still a little bit of wiring to go, so I'm gonna keep smashing it out. I believe now that we have the Canberra module, we can actually remove this ZD harness altogether. Apologize for the slow content, haven't uploaded in 2 weeks, but this is literally 3 days work so far, and today will be the 4th. So we're gonna keep smashing into it. The wiring does take a long time, but we'll get there in the end and it'll all be worth it. So I'm actually gonna start by putting this Canberra module in because I'm really excited to just have that side of it done. Then we can move on to running the ignition power, mount the fuel pump, and mount that little relay box for the fans. All right, we've got the Canberra all hooked up now. Pretty simple wiring. You just got to hook it up to the 2 diagnostic ports and a power and earth. And what I've done is I've put some little Velcro circles on the back. I've also put some under the dash here. So this now can just go up under and stick up like that, and it's nice and tucked away. So as far as I'm aware, under here is fully wired up. Now, I'm not sure if I can take the ECU plugs out yet. I'm gonna just leave them there just in case. But I've already just pushed the loom back through the firewall. So it's just gonna be sitting inside there for now, and that's just in case we do need it, but I don't think we do. With the Canberra, you can't have the ECU plugged in anyway, so I can't imagine that those wires, we need any of them. So I'm gonna move on to the last ignition wire, so that is this guy here. Now, the good thing about our new system is I've only got to run a wire up and then to the bottom of this fuse block. Once we're done with this swap, we'll go ahead and label everything. So we'll have like power for ECU, the fans, the fuel pump. That way, if a fuse blows, I'll know exactly what's going on. All right, this blue wire here is our new ignition wire for whatever that ignition wire was. Now, I didn't have red, so the blue is just gonna have to do, but I'm pretty certain that is the end of that loom. Everything seems to be hooked up, and I don't think there's much more that we've got to run. So I'm really hoping that I can just tidy this loom up now and zip tie it up on that firewall. I did just go out and buy some really thick conduit, and we can just put that over and then tape that up. Now, I'm really hoping that we don't have to cut that back open for any reason. That would absolutely suck. So let's get into just tidying this up just a little bit, and then I'll see you guys in a sec. Right, that looks a lot better now. It doesn't feel like such a mess. So obviously I've put the conduit over, taped it up, used a cloth tape. Now that's not in its final resting position. We might be changing it. It's just zip tied up there just to make it look pretty just for now. But that's good progress. As long as all that works, we are done with the engine side of things. Mint. This thing here is the Davies Craig little controller for the thermo fans. We can actually select the temperature for how cool it turns on and how hot it turns off. So the Davies Craig fan controller is all mounted up. Now we can read the digital display, so that is going to be for adjusting this thing. Now I mounted it there on some riv nuts just so if I ever need to remove the radiator, it's just a 2-second job to pop that off. The harness comes up here. We've got our ignition side and our constant side. You can see there, I've got fan and fan down the bottom. So we are going to be running the water temp sensor, which is this thing here, but I don't actually have the right fitting. This is the bung that has come out the bottom of the radiator. So I want to put this in, but it's not the right size. So I'll have to get a bush for that. So we are done with wiring for today. I'm actually over it. I've done 4 days straight wiring. So I'm going to be moving on to some actual fun stuff here. Now, from 4JJ1 Bling Parts, we have some more bling stuff for our motor. We've got full billet pulley kit. We've also got the stuff to run our AN breather lines. So the 4Js do breathe a little bit. So we're going to be running twin breathers to our catch can. We've also got an injector cover just to hide the look of the injectors and those plugs. And we've got a Heim joint alternator mount, which is really cool. I'm going to fit all this stuff up. I've also got some new belts somewhere right here actually. So I'm going to chuck these new belts on as well, and that'll be the front end of the motor complete. So let's get into whacking these bling parts on. Oh, this thing looks good. I'm going to start by fitting this up. Goes right about there. Get this mounted up. I've got to find some bolts. All right, I'm going to cut these 2 bolts down and I'll fit that up. That thing looks absolutely mint. Let's move on to the pulleys. It's going to fit this little Heim joint onto the alternator. This becomes our new adjustable bracket to tension the belt. All right, we have got the Heim joint alternator bracket, the top injector cover, and the water pump pulley. This thing looks friggin' mint now. It would have looked good if we could have fit the other 2 pulleys up, but that's not a drama. Now, I did actually paint this alternator red a while ago. I am going to go out and get another one just because it's a bit dodgy at the back where that main connection is. So I'll probably just buy a black one and then we'll mount the red pulley on the front of it, and that'll look really good. What I want to do next is our breathers. Now, these 4Js do breathe a fair bit. Now, obviously we've got our catch can. Our catch can has 2 ports. I can actually mod this to make it have 2 ports. So we're going to do that. Then all of our gases are just going to be caught in this can. It's not going to recirc back to the intake. That way we can just drain that every now and again, and we're not going to get any restrictions in our breathing stuff. I did just order AN lines and black and red fittings off eBay. This stuff should be more than capable of handling some blow-by. And it was a lot cheaper. It was about $100 for that whole kit. So we'll get this plumbed up, make it look snazzy, then we'll probably pack up for the day. It's actually crazy how nice that AN line actually looks. I'm really, really happy with that. Once again, got it off eBay. It was $100 for the hose and all the fittings, so not too bad at all. Now that is plumbed up to the catch can, 2 of them going in. I might have to put some steel wool in there just to stop it coming out this filter here, but for the most part, that'll just fill up with oil and we won't have any crankcase pressure, which is great. I did also just whack the EGR valve back on, and the only 2 plugs that I have left to sort out are these 2, which is part of this vacuum system here. This bracket looks ridiculous when you bolt it on, so in the next episode, I'm probably gonna start modifying this and try and tuck that away somewhere a little bit better. But except for those 2 plugs and the fuel pump, we are wired up, which is just a godsend. I'm bloody stoked about that. It is honestly such a good feeling to have that wiring done, all taped up. Let's just hope it works and we don't have to go back in there. Now, I was a little bit worried that the plumbing and the wiring would make this engine bay look like crap, but I actually don't mind it at all. I think it's really broken up the bling and added a bit more black, which I think looks good. But obviously practicality wise doesn't really matter. But yeah, that is it. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this one and it wasn't too messy. I have no idea what I'm about to go in and edit, but I'm gonna get out a video anyway. But drop a like if you liked the episode, drop a comment, let me know what you think, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.